Now let's talk about the impact of borrowing. So, um, we already talked about discretionary fiscal policy and basically where the government could do more spending or less taxes. I wanted to give another example that I really like. President Lyndon B. Johnson had this Great Society idea. This was a good example of how expansionary fiscal policy could really be a big deal. So the Great Society program became Lyndon B. Johnson's agenda for Congress in January 1965. And the whole goal here was basically to increase the standard of living, such as aid to education, attacking on disease, we're implementing Medicare, we're having urban renewal, beautification, basically making parks more beautiful. Okay, conservation, development of depressed regions, a wide-scale fight against poverty, control and prevention of crime and delinquency, and removal of obstacles to the right to vote. All of these things were the Great Society, and Lyndon B. Johnson was doing everything he could in order to work towards this. Now, in order to do this, he did have to increase a lot of government spending. He did have to implement new programs that, most of the time most of these we don't really use today, but some of these actually led to other things as well that we kind of started here. Now, as we can see here, the gross national product rose 10% in the first year of this tax cut, and then economic growth averaged a rate of 4.5% from 1961 to 1968. So, we had government spending, we had tax cuts, and economic growth. That was the whole goal of doing all these things, was to grow the economy, increase the standard of living, and that's what's happening here through the Great Society. So that was all the government spending. But now let's talk about the impact of this, right? The impact of the government borrowing. So when the government are borrowers in the financial market, there are three possible sources for the funding from this view, right? So the households could save more, the private firms could borrow less, remember the crowding out effect, and then more foreign financial investors from outside countries. This is where it gets interesting, okay? Because not only do we have businesses and consumers here, but we also have other people as well. And as we know with the foreign exchange, right, is that whenever the interest rates change, you want to invest in that country. So now we have to look at foreign countries as well, wanting to invest in the U.S. So here we go. So we already know about, the demand and supply of the demand and supply of financial capital. So the supply of financial capital really comes from the savings or extra money coming in from the foreign countries. So basically, the savings from the households plus the difference between the imports and the exports. Okay, and then we also need to look at the quantity demanded of financial capital. We need to be looking at the investment that they're wanting it, and then the difference between the government spending and the taxes, because that's going to be the budget deficit or surplus. So that's going to depend. That's going to change how much financial capital you have. Right. So if we have a budget deficit, okay, and it increases, like you have a higher budget deficit, then we will see a fall in the investment because of the higher interest rate. We could see an increase in savings, maybe because of the higher interest rates, or a trade deficit rises. Basically, you have more imports than exports, okay, if there's a trade deficit. If the budget deficit falls, meaning you have a surplus, then we could have a rise in the investment, we could have a fall in the private savings, and then we could have a trade surplus. We could actually have more exports than imports, all because of a budget surplus. So these are the differences here, okay? If we have a deficit, we could have a trade deficit. If we have a budget surplus, we could have a trade surplus. So as we can see here, here's another example of basically the surpluses and the deficits. So basically, this big scary number right here back in 2020, this was a ton of spending. Look at that. Ton of spending going on there. Like, this was $3,000 in terms of a deficit. $3 billion deficit. Or no, that's $3 trillion. It's $3 trillion deficit right there in 2020. All right, and we've had deficits for a while now. We've had deficits ever since like 2002. So we keep spending more money than we're bringing in. So how does that affect the economy? Well, and the trade balance? We'll talk about that next video. I'll see you there.